3 years ago, my partner and I bought our first home. It was modest, with wonderful neighbors, and life was good. So good that 18 months later, when those neighbors decided to sell their larger house with a driveway, garage, and bathtub, we jumped at the chance. We bought their house and put our old one next door up for sale. After reading several motivation letters, we chose a Polish couple. They only spoke English to us, not Dutch like we did. Everything seemed normal at first. They asked for house tips, and we had pleasant small talk. But looking back, that was the calm before the storm. Even before the big incidents, things fell off. We started experiencing bizarre disturbances at odd hours. Sometimes at midnight, we'd hear heavy banging or incredibly loud music blasting through the walls without warning. It wasn't constant, but enough to make us feel like we didn't truly know who was living a few feet away. The first red flag appeared when the neighbor came home with severe damage to both sides of his car. It looked like he had scraped against a guardrail at high speed on both sides. When we asked what happened, he gave a clumsy excuse: a concrete pole on one side and a trailer taking a turn too wide on the other. We chose to believe him, even though the math didn't add up. One evening around 6 p.m., the neighbor called us in a total panic. He claimed people were outside his house turning security cameras away. He begged us to check it out and call the police. We looked, and sure enough, 2 men were breaking in. We called the cops immediately. It took them 20 minutes to arrive, so the burglars were already gone. The neighbor's wife came racing into the street, parked her car, and frantically ran inside to her sweet little French bulldog and the police. Curiously, when I was walking my dog, I saw the husband park his car 3 streets away and walk to the scene as if he was hiding his vehicle from the police. That thought didn't occur to me at the moment. Later, when we checked the doorbell footage, we saw the burglar standing there before the break-in, calmly discussing which house to target. In Polish. Nothing was stolen. No one was caught. I told the police it felt like a setup, but I never heard back. A week later, I was at a housewarming party when my partner texted me. The music next door is insanely loud again. A few minutes later, he called me, his tone pure terror. The neighbor's car had just come tearing through our front garden and slammed into the neighbor's own front door. 2 men were frantically loading the car with high-end electronics, flat-screen TVs, professional speakers, expensive gear. They looked like the same men from the week before. This time, the police arrived in exactly 7 minutes. They intercepted the men while they were still loading the car. When asked for ID, the men claimed they didn't have any. Then things got surreal. The man behind the wheel looked the officer in the eye and claimed to be my neighbor, using my neighbor's actual name. But there was a catch. In the 9 months they lived next to us, my neighbor had never spoken a single word of Dutch. This man, however, spoke fluent Dutch with a thick Polish accent. Realizing the game was up, the men slammed the car into gear, and a violent pursuit followed through our quiet streets until the police managed to box them in and arrest them. But my partner could still hear movement inside our neighbor's house. The police went back in and dragged out a 3rd suspect. As we were inside our own home with an officer to report the damage to our property, the doorbell rang. We turned around, and there he was, the actual neighbor. He was unrecognizable. His face was a swollen, bloody mess. One eye was swollen shut, his mouth was torn, and his arm hung at a useless angle, covered in what looked like defensive stab wounds. He looked feral, aggressive, and broken. The police officer tried to intervene, but the neighbor flat out refused to file a report or cooperate. Since the victim wouldn't speak, the officer had no choice but to send him back to his house. Later that night, the neighbor rang our bell again. He was trembling. He confessed that he cheated on his wife and claimed she had sent people to take him out. He begged to sleep at our house. Terrified and wanting no part of this underworld drama, we refused. My partner offered to drive him to the hospital instead. We dropped him off at 10:30 p.m., telling him we were staying elsewhere for the night because we no longer felt safe. But we didn't. We went home, locked every door, and tried to breathe. Around 1 a.m., our dog started growling. A specific low growl he only uses when someone's at the door. We checked the doorbell camera, and there he was. The neighbor was back from the hospital, standing on our porch, ringing the doorbell multiple times. We sat in the dark, watching the screen in silence. Then, after what felt like an eternity, a car turned onto the street. The neighbor panicked. He scrambled off the porch and hid behind our cars in the driveway, crouching in the shadows. Watching this bloodied, Broken man lurking in the dark behind our own cars was one of the most unsettling things I've ever seen. The car stopped, and a woman got out. It was his wife. She walked toward her front door, paused, glanced at our driveway, and saw him. We held our breath. She walked toward him, and as she stepped into the pale yellow glow of the street lamp, she began to wail, a haunting, guttural crying. He didn't say a word. She kept asking questions, her sobbing getting louder and louder, echoing through the empty street. Eventually, they both got into the car and drove away. We didn't see them for 3 days. We didn't even know where their dog was. The wife eventually returned alone. She found the dog inside and told us she doesn't think she'll ever see her husband again. Whatever the real story is, drugs, debt, or a marriage turned lethal, I've realized one thing. I don't think I want to know. It was a cold winter day in mid-December, and I was 15 years old. I originally lived in a suburban area of Alberta with my parents in our apartment. But we were running low on space, and with my little sister on the way, we knew we had to move to a bigger house. It seemed lucky at first because there was a house just a few blocks down selling for a very cheap price. Granted, it wasn't in the best area, but it had room to grow. And for the price we paid, we could renovate to our heart's content. My dad renovated slightly with the money we had left, mainly the basement, as it was almost unusable without being fixed up, cleaning, carpeting, new beams, fixing the bathroom, and fresh wallpaper with a cool pattern I got to choose myself. For the first couple of months, living there was great. I was really enjoying the new house until the first questionable moment came along. It was my father's birthday. We had all gone to a restaurant in the evening. All went well until we came home to our front door wide open. My mom was absolutely shaken, and she called the police while my dad grabbed a large heavy wrench from his toolbox and went inside to search for the intruder. 5 excruciatingly long minutes later, the police arrived. They searched the house and found my dad. Nothing was actually stolen, and no one was inside. However, some of our items were moved or knocked over, specifically the books on my bookshelf. From that day forward, I would always hear strange noises coming from the walls and sometimes underneath our basement. My room was in the basement, but I always dismissed the sounds as the pipes. This was an older house, after all. That was until one night something unexplainable happened. It was around 2 a.m., and I was playing with my Nintendo DS under the sheets with no volume, so my parents didn't know I was still awake. That's when I heard it, clear laughter coming from the wall to the side of my bed. My heart froze. I decided to wait to see if it happened again. After about 30 minutes of lying still as a stone, I decided it must have been my sleep-deprived imagination and finally went to sleep. I woke up the next morning as usual. Despite that laugh still burning in my mind, I tried to pass it off. I would still hear strange noises every so often for the next couple of weeks, but that felt normal for me. By this time, my sister was already born, and since the basement was big enough and my mom trusted me to keep her safe at night, she shared the room with me. My mom still used baby monitors. She kept the parent units in the living room and the other in the kitchen. One night, my parents went out for a late dinner and left me to take care of the house. I was in the living room watching a movie when I got up for a snack. That's when I noticed odd noises coming from the baby monitor. My heart sank. Those were footsteps. Loud, heavy footsteps. Suddenly, my sister started crying, and I heard a faint shoo sound come out of the speaker, followed by a crash. I ran as quickly as I could to my parents' room and grabbed my father's rifle. I didn't have the key to unlock the trigger lock or any ammunition, but I figured I would pretend it was loaded and use the buttstock to defend myself if attacked. All I thought of was getting my sister to safety. When I got to the basement door, I opened it quietly and walked down the steps. No one was there, but my sister was still crying, and the baby monitor was on the ground sideways. I mustered all the courage I could and yelled, "I'm armed. Come out before I find you." Still nothing. I grabbed my sister and ran upstairs, closed the basement door, and pushed a chair under the handle while I called my parents. The police got to my house before my parents did. They made me sit in the back of the cop car with my baby sister while an officer went inside to investigate. When my parents arrived, I told them everything. The police officer came out and gave us an all clear. No one was in the house. Just as they were about to leave, my dad worriedly asked them, "Did you check behind the bookshelf?" In my room, there was a bookshelf embedded into the wall. I was very confused when my dad asked that. The police officer was confused too, but he asked my father to come inside and point out what he meant. Lo and behold, when we got downstairs, my bookshelf was pushed open slightly like a door, and the basement window that leads to the backyard was opened all the way with my desk chair planted under it. Behind the bookshelf was a small room with pipes wrapped around some of the walls. On the ground were food wrappers, one of our cups that had gone missing, lotion, a switchblade, and an apple that was partially eaten but still slightly fresh. Someone had been living in our house, and we didn't even know it this whole time. The police said that most likely, while they were outside talking to us, whoever was there escaped through the open window. That wasn't even the most horrifying part. A few days later, I pushed open the bookshelf myself and explored it top to bottom. That's when I found a tiny hole in the wall. When I looked through, it pointed directly to my bed and dresser. Whoever was in there was watching me sleep, get dressed, play my video games, do my homework, speak on the phone, everything. They knew most of my life. I'm an adult now and live in my own apartment with my boyfriend. My parents still live there 5 years later. To this day, I worry for them and hope whoever that was never returns. This all started back in 2017 when I moved into a new house in the suburbs of Montreal, Canada, with my parents and little sister. Before I get into the juicy part, I need to explain a few details about my room for everything to make sense. The house is a split-level home, meaning staggered floors connected by short flights of stairs. My room was neither on the main floor nor in the basement. It sat exactly in between, at ground level. One wall shared space with the garage, and the opposite side had a large window looking out into the backyard. That window had plastic vertical blinds with several missing panels, so even when fully closed, I could still see outside through the gaps. On the garage side of my room was my closet with large sliding mirror doors. This meant that when I was in bed, no matter which way I faced, I could always see my window reflected back at me. I started noticing things about a year after we moved in, when I was 15. I remember watching YouTube videos on my tablet late at night since I had trouble falling asleep. One night, I heard something outside my window. I had left it open because it was hot, and we hadn't invested in an AC unit yet. After hearing what sounded like footsteps or shuffling, I paused my video. The noise stopped. I resumed the video and heard it again. I looked toward my window but saw nothing. I eventually fell asleep. A couple of nights later, during my usual late-night routine, I heard the shuffling again. I paused and listened longer. I swear I could hear breathing now. I glanced at my window. Nothing. I convinced myself it was my mind playing tricks and turned to face my closet instead. As I picked my tablet back up, I saw something move at my window through one of the gaps in the blinds, reflected in the mirror. A chill ran down my spine. I got up immediately and went to wake my parents. My dad went outside to check the backyard. A few minutes later, he came back saying he'd checked every corner and didn't see anything. He told me that if someone had been there, he would have heard them come through the squeaky gate. He also checked the Ring camera, which showed no one walking toward the backyard. I suggested the person could have jumped the fence into the neighbor's yard, but he quickly shut that down, saying we lived in a safe neighborhood and that I should stop watching scary movies. I believed him and went back to bed. Every couple of weeks or months after that, I'd hear things again. Each time I convinced myself it was all in my head. When winter came and everything was covered in snow, it stopped, and I eventually forgot about it. But the following year, it started again. Once or twice a month at most, always past 11 p.m. I tried not to pay attention, even when the noises sounded like clear footsteps or deep breathing. I avoided looking at the window altogether. But one night, against my better judgment, I looked at the mirror instead. This time, I swear I saw the silhouette of a person. I ran upstairs again, and once again, after checking the backyard, my dad told me the same thing. And once again, I believed him. This went on for a while. I started going to bed earlier, watching videos louder or with headphones, and completely avoiding my mirror or looking directly at my window. It always stopped when the weather got cold and started again in mid-spring. Then, one night in early December 2021, there was a huge windstorm. I was watching a stream with my boyfriend over Discord when I decided to grab a glass of water around 11:30 p.m. On my way, I noticed my parents sitting in the living room. Their faces looked tense and preoccupied. I asked if everything was okay, but they brushed it off. As I turned toward the stairs, flashes of red and blue light caught my attention through the front window. A police car was pulling into our driveway. My parents immediately stood up as if they'd been expecting it and rushed me to my room, telling me they'd call me if needed. Not even 2 minutes later, I was called back upstairs. My dad explained that about 15 to 20 minutes earlier, during the windstorm, he had stepped into the backyard to make sure nothing had been blown over. While scanning the yard, he noticed the light from my bedroom window illuminating something near it. As his eyes adjusted, he realized it was a man standing motionless just outside my window. Staring in, my dad yelled at him and started moving toward him, but the man immediately turned and ran. He jumped the back fence effortlessly, as if he'd done it 100 times before, and disappeared into the neighboring yards. In that moment, everything I had feared for years became a fact. I hadn't imagined it. Someone really had been there. My parents called the police right away and then went to knock on the neighbor's door to warn her. The older woman who lived there didn't open the door. Instead, she yelled at them to leave or she would call the cops herself. The police eventually arrived, but since my dad hadn't gotten a clear look at the man, there wasn't much they could do beyond increasing patrols and recommending more cameras, which we did. In retrospect, my back neighbor's reaction still feels deeply suspicious. Was she living with that man? Had she seen him too and genuinely thought it was him knocking? Did I know the person who stood outside my window for years? Or was it just some creepy neighbor who noticed a teenage girl's room with poorly covered blinds and took advantage of it? Did he only want to watch, or was he working up to something else? Even now, those questions haunt me. Knowing that someone was really there the entire time makes every sound I brushed off, every breath I thought I imagined, and every silhouette I forced myself not to look at feel so much more terrifying. I've since switched rooms and can't look at windows facing our backyard the same way anymore. Thank God mine now faces the street. What scares me the most isn't that it happened. It's how long it went on without anyone knowing, and how easily it could have continued.